Hello, I'm Dickie Arbiter in London.
And I'm Victoria Arbiter in New York, and you're watching Royal Report. It's been a busy month for King Charles III and his wife, Queen Camilla. Of course, there was a state opening of Parliament just a short time ago. The King has been busy with all of his regular engagements, of which there have been a lot in the run-up to the holiday season. But today, we're going to take a look back at the state visit to Kenya. That happened a little while ago. Why are we discussing that now, I hear you ask? Well, that's because it was a significant trip for a number of reasons. It wasn't his first state visit as King. Of course, he's been to France and Germany, but it was an important trip because it was his first state visit to one of the Commonwealth nations, of which there are 56. Many people asking why Kenya? Well, it's not up to him. It's up to the British government. But this trip was loaded before he even set foot on the plane. People wondering if he was going to apologise for the atrocities carried out by the British government many years ago. And a lot of people suggesting that it wasn't up to him to apologise. So before the King had even landed, we had seen endless editorials. So, Dad, first of all, let's just get to the nitty-gritty of planning a trip like this, particularly one that is loaded, particularly one that has optics being viewed from every side and people trying to promote an agenda. In my view, I thought the King handled it masterfully, particularly his speech at the state banquet. If that wasn't a lesson in diplomacy and grace, I don't know what was. But what would have been happening in the lead up to that in terms of the government's role? And perhaps you could answer why Kenya for his first state visit to a Commonwealth nation.
Okay, let's start with why Kenya for the first state visit to a Commonwealth country. Primarily because it's the closest that he can get to. A lot of talk in media circles as why no Australia, why no New Zealand? Well, they are a long way away, and you can't drop in like Kenya for 4 days or France and Germany for 3 days and then hop out again. You've got to devote considerable amount of time to both Australia and New Zealand because they are so far away, because they are difficult to get to. And as I've said before, that I believe that they are both countries that are possible probably before the next Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting next year in October in Samoa, because it makes sense. He's going out into that part of the world to do the two countries, then go on to the Commonwealth Heads of Government before coming home. But Kenya was always going to be a bit like walking on eggshells. There's been a lot of talk about the King should be apologising for Mau Mau atrocities in the 1950s during the Mau Mau War. There were atrocities on both sides. But there are those who say the King should have apologised. It's not up to the King to apologise. The speech he made at the state banquet the other night were words that were approved by the government, by the Prime Minister. He will write the speech. He will have a lot of input into the speech, but there are things he can say and things he can't say. Let's go back to when he turned 70 5 years ago. He made very clear that he knew his constitutional role, that he wouldn't be overstepping the mark, he wouldn't be getting involved in politics, he would remain completely neutral, as his mother did for 70 years. So there was no change there. So the speech that he gave at the state banquet, very much some of his words, because he spoke of pained at what happened all those years ago, that he looked upon the visit as learning and coming to terms with what happened all those years ago. What is quite interesting, that Kenyans are actually saying it's the past, we have to move on. And that is quite significant. But there is an element of people, not necessarily in Kenya, but feel that the King should apologise. It's not for the King to apologise, it's for the government to apologise, because it's the government that created the situation. So we are, I wouldn't say in a stalemate. President William Ruto made reference to the King's speech. He said he was exemplary, and that is quite something coming from a head of state about atrocities that happened more than 60 years ago. So the King treading on eggshells, soft diplomacy, very important, but a very important visit, not just for the King, but very important visit to the British government. They have given a lot of aid. They are training the Kenyan army. They are developing a lot in Kenya, helping Kenya. There is it's a two-way trade between the two countries. And President Rufo was very much at pains to explain that, yes, a lot of Kenyans living in the United Kingdom, but a lot of Kenyans living into the United Kingdom contributing to the betterment of the country. So an important visit, an important first visit to a Commonwealth country, but as I say, important visit, all his visits to foreign countries are important. On behalf of UK PLC, banging the drum for UK PLC, and that is what is important.
Now, the visit, of course, was timed to coincide with Kenya's upcoming 60th anniversary of independence. And as you mentioned, it was a trip that was important for the government for a number of reasons. And so they have sent off a master in terms of soft diplomacy, but they've talked about Kenya being, and this is quite a compliment, Kenya being a key player in Africa's booming digital economy. It's regarded as the bulwark of democracy in East Africa. British troops train there. The UK is the largest European inward investor, and trade stands at 1.2 billion annually. Also, with focus on climate change, of course, it will have been important to the King as well. So, you know, that's all the government side of things. But I think for the King, who is a learned man, a well-read man, someone who has apologised, sort of. He certainly referenced British atrocities in other Commonwealth nations, perhaps fallen short of that apology, but he certainly addressed them, which is why I really wanted to take a bit of a closer look at this speech, because the words chosen were, I thought, authentic, they were genuine, and his delivery was wonderful. And of course, the King is a fantastic public speaker. He never fails to deliver when it comes to putting a message across. But this one was particularly poignant. And he went a lot further, I think, than a lot of people had expected, certainly his critics. He acknowledged that the wrongdoings of the past are a cause of the greatest sorrow and the deepest regret. He also said that nothing he said or did could change the past, but he expressed a desire to be an architect of the future. So he acknowledged what had happened. And much like his mother, we talk a lot on this show about generations learning from previous generations, and so clearly taken a leaf out of her book in that regard. He said that there were no excuses for the abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence committed by the British colonial government against Kenyans during their struggle for independence. And I thought this part was important. He said he was determined to use his 4-day visit to deepen his own understanding of such wrongs and to meet those whose lives were shattered. And I think over the course of the 4 days, they did something like 23 engagements in 4 days. And of course, it ticked a lot of the boxes in terms of the interest that the King and Queen Camilla have. But they were praised by the Kenyans that they met with while they were there. There was a really nice quote from Kenyan Air Force Brigadier General Oswald Opayo, who created the museum that where the Tunnel of Martyrs is housed. And he showed the couple around, and he said the King had been keen to learn about the Mau Mau uprising. And then his response to how the King had behaved while they were there, he said, "I find it very, very gracious that there is a kind of catharsis. And then for him to be dignified, to hear it from our voice is very happy." So that is someone that sort of had a vested interest in showing the King around this particular museum. And he was pleased with how it was received. But also, I think if we're going to sort of jump to our favorite moments of the tour, I thought the speech was wonderful. But Dad, you know, I'm bonkers about elephants. Absolutely love them. And Camilla did a fantastic trip to the Sheldrick. Yeah, I love cats too. She's getting jealous. To the Sheldrick Foundation, which is where orphaned elephants and rhinos are brought in. Many of them have lost their mothers to poaching. And this would have been a particularly personal visit for Queen Camilla because her brother, Mark Shand, he was considered a bit of an Indiana Jones when it came to his adventuring. He had founded a charity called Elephant Family, and that was primarily focused on aiding elephants across Asia. The charity's done tremendous work, but he very tragically died in New York in 2014. He was here for a fundraiser. He fell and hit his head. And following his death, Queen Camilla, of course, she was Duchess of Cornwall then, she vowed to continue his work and to make sure that his vision was followed through upon. And so in June 2015, she and the king launched the Asian Elephant Alliance, which aimed to raise £20 million to aid the future survival of India's elephants. So her going to Sheldrick Wildlife Trust will have been deeply personal, and it made for some fantastic images of those babies being bottle fed. I've been able to adopt a couple of those elephants in the past, and that's a lovely holiday gift for anyone that might be watching if you've got a bit of an affinity for elephants as well. But I think there were lots of moments, weren't there, Dad, throughout this tour? I mean, it was 4 days. They hit the ground running. They did that royal thing where you cram in as much as humanly possible. They did stuff that was important to them, but I think they also paid tribute to their hosts.
They did pay tribute to their hosts, and what was heartening was the great British media. They were very positive right throughout of this visit. Yes, there are a few armchair warriors picking bits and pieces out of the visit, like, for example, the optics are bad on the red carpet. Absolute nonsense. It's not our place, our organisers' place, to tell the Kenyans what to do. They put down a red carpet. That's what they do for everybody. And let's not forget, it wasn't just the king walking on the red carpet. It was President William Ruto, the head of state of Kenya. So these armchair warriors need to put up and shut up. Because quite frankly, if they've got nothing positive to add, then don't. But, you know, most of the time these people come out because they've got a book to sell, and it's the only way they can get some publicity on it. But, you know,
well, do you know what, Dad, just real quickly, when you're saying that, because it just, as I'm hearing it from you, you realise how preposterous it is. It's like if all you've got to complain about is the colour of a carpet, and you're suggesting that that means that the monarchy is out of touch, etc., whatever the complaint is, then that just goes to show how successful the tour is, because it's like, oh, that looks terrible optics on a red carpet. But it's like, really, we've just had this incredibly diplomatic, profound and poignant speech from the king, but you're complaining about carpets. So I think that means monarchy 1, mischief makers 0.
Yeah, and the Kenyans are still catching their breath after that visit, because it was a bit whirlwind. 25 engagements, as you mentioned, over 4 days. They covered everything. They covered women's clubs, women's organisations, a wonderful sequence of Camilla holding hands with the women of the club and dancing. She's game for everything, and she's an absolute asset to the British monarchy, contrary to what people might have been writing years ago, criticising. She is absolutely tops in the job that she's doing. So people in Kenya, very pleased with the way it went. The government certainly very pleased with the way it went. And, you know, we have to look and see what future trade there is. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of trade coming off it, because at the end of the day, what it is, King Charles beating the drum for UK PLC, because that is his job. It's not his job to apologise. It's not his job to make political speeches. It's not his job to make political capital out of anything. It is his job to beat the drum and fly the flag for UK PLC. It's for the government to pick up and run with any trade that might come out of it, or aid that will come out of it. And a lot of trade does come from these visits.
I think that's where the king is also continuing to surprise his critics, because there was so much for years about King Charles is going to meddle, King Charles is too political, King Charles won't be able to keep his mouth shut. He's done everything that's expected of him, and then some, and even better. And so that's why I'm enjoying watching sort of the start of his reign and the progression of his reign. But going back to Kenya and the African continent as a whole, of course, it is where in 1952 Princess Elizabeth went up a tree a princess and she came down a queen. She was one of the very last people to learn of her father's death and her subsequent accession. She was on safari in Kenya. It was a stop en route to Australia and New Zealand. In those days, the plane couldn't make it all the way in sort of one go. But since then, the royals have enjoyed a warm relationship with a number of countries across Africa. Clearly, these countries are places they love to visit. It was in Kenya that Prince William proposed to then Catherine Middleton. It was Kenya that Prince Charles, as he was then, went in 1971. According to Robert Hardman, it was Royal biographer Robert Hardman, it's where he grew his first beard. But it was also where Princess Anne was with him. And that's where she first became introduced to the work of Save the Children. And now, more than half a century later, she's still doing phenomenal work on behalf of the charity. She has been so committed. She actually went in 1971 with a blue Peter children's television show, for those who don't know, production company. And I think they wanted to sort of show this image of a different kind of princess, one who was happy to be photographed riding and digging and getting sort of into the crux of things, perhaps in a way that people didn't think princesses ever had before. It's where it was South Africa that then Prince Charles took Prince Harry shortly after Princess Diana died. And during that trip, Harry got to meet the Spice Girls. Prince William spent part of his gap year in Kenya. And it was also in Southern Africa that Prince Harry really, I think, just fell in love with Lesotho. It's a very small African nation where he committed to doing work with children who had lost their parents to HIV/AIDS. He did phenomenal work in Lesotho and continues to do so. And of course, both William and Harry have continued the conservation work that they have learned from their father and their late grandfather. So I think it really, in a way, as much as the king knew that there was a lot riding on this trip, because it was so personal and he felt that personal connection to the country, I think he was ready to embrace it and he was ready to do the trip.
He was very ready to do the trip, having done 2 trips onto the European mainland, to Germany last March, to France in October. He was ready to do a foreign trip. Let's not forget the first state visit was an inward one, was South Africa, the South African president in December last year. And we have coming up on the 21st, the president of South Korea. So he's touched all corners of the globe, nothing from stateside yet. That'll come in the fullness of time. But he has touched 3 continents, or will have touched 4 continents, in fact. So it's important that he does what he's supposed to do, and what he's supposed to do is to sell UK PLC, and he's doing an absolutely incredible job. And it doesn't matter what government is in power, what party is in power, he will still carry on doing what he is supposed to do. And you know, at 75, he's come to the job rather late. But let's not forget everything that he did as the Prince of Wales. He started the Prince's Trust when he came out of the Navy in 1976. A phenomenal organisation, helped over 1 million kids get onto the property ladder, get onto the employment ladder, help them out in whatever. He started a scheme to help young people do their homework while their parents were at work. What government has done that? No government has done that. And having helped over 1 million kids, very much like his father with the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, over 6 million worldwide. So he is a people person. He understands young people, irrespective of what the polls might say, that young people don't understand what it's all about. They do understand what it's all about. It's about the question that you ask when you do a poll. So he's very much involved. We saw him in Kenya with young people, with middle-aged people, with elderly people. That wonderful old man, 107 he was supposed to be, presenting...
Or 117, actually, I think he might have said that. Yes, yeah. Presenting
him with a medal from the Second World War. I mean, that was incredible. So he met people of every age. And what is telling in the job that he's doing, he's got a smile on his face. He's happy in what he's doing. He's happy that Camilla is there. She's got a smile on her face as well. So they're enjoying what they are doing. Yes, there are serious sides to it, but most of the time he's got a smile on his face, and that can only be good for the future.
It's interesting you talk about young people and this focus on young people, because I was astonished to learn actually that Kenya has 80% of the population is below the age of 35, which is extraordinary. So that's why they sort of wanted an emphasis on the future. It's important to acknowledge the past, but they wanted to look ahead to the future. But that gentleman you mentioned that was 117 years old, that medal presentation was particularly special because that gentleman had served alongside British forces during the war, and he had got rid of his medals during the Mau Mau uprising because he was scared for his safety and his family's safety for being seen to support the colonists. And so he had whatever he had done with, he had dispensed with his medals. But he looked, to me, certainly very proud to be receiving them again, to be receiving them from the king. And the king was very tender and respectful of him on that presentation. So I thought that was really a special moment. But you mentioned this state visit that's coming up to the UK. We don't have too much time left, but what can we expect to see from that? Because a state visit is very different to an official visit, and this is an important one.
Well, a state visit, there's all the ceremonial arrival. There's a ceremonial arrival on Horse Guards Parade where the President of South Korea will inspect a guard of honour. There'll be a carriage procession back to Buckingham Palace. There'll be a lunch for the arrival lunch. There will be a visit by the President to Westminster Abbey to pay his respects at the tomb of the unknown warrior. There will be a state banquet where there will be two speeches, one from the President of South Korea, the other one from the King. And then on day two, get down to the nitty-gritty, because he'll be meeting the Prime Minister at Downing Street. He'll be meeting opposition leaders. And there'll probably be something, although the programme hasn't been announced yet, there'll be something of interest to him in relation to UK South Korea relations. What is quite interesting, just a few days ago, the King and Queen paid a visit to South Korean suburb to meet residents of South Korea who have now settled in the UK. So he's doing everything right. He is getting involved with the communities here in the UK, with communities when he goes abroad on a state visit. So another state visit coming up, inward, a lot of ceremony, but a lot of business between the President and the government.
Needless to say, we'll be covering that state visit in a future episode of Royal Report, all the pomp, all the pageantry, and some of the history and the precedent from previous state visits as we look to this state visit and what we can expect from future state visits during the reign of King Charles III. So please be sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any of the news that will be coming up in the future weeks. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Royal Report.